1 Samuel. We are picking up this evening. I know we're starting at verse 10, but for context, let's go back to verse 8 and read verses 8 through 10. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And when they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent into the land of the Philistines round about, to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtoreth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan.
One thing that it's important to remember, and I mean, this is just the way they all did it, whether it was Israel or whomever, that when you defeated the enemy, the ones that are killed, you go back out on the battlefield and you start taking everything off of them of any value, okay? And so this is what he's talking about when he's talking about stripping the slain. And then when they, in the process of doing this, they realize this is the king and his sons. And so then they cut his head off. They take his armor. Now they have bragging rights, if you will. And so they place his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreth, that's gods. And they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. I mean, you know, you're talking about disgracing someone to the utmost, and that's what they're doing here, okay?
And when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan, and came to Jabesh and burnt them there.
So this is a pretty honorable move that these men make, and it's not for the faint-hearted. You understand that they're going in at high risk to take this body down, and it's an honorable thing that they're doing for Saul. They travel all night to do it. They take the body down, Saul and his sons, and they bring them back to Jabesh where they burned them. You understand? I mean, that's not a desecrating thing in this particular case, okay? But it's, by that time, you're talking about decomposition and stuff, you understand?
And they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days.
And so after they burn the bodies and all that, then they actually bury the body, and then they fast as an act of mourning, okay, for them 7 days. Now, according to Acts chapter 13 and verse 21, Saul reigned over Israel for 40 years. That was the longevity of his reign. Now, something to remember in all this before we go into 2 Samuel is just understand how Saul is killed, because we're going to see a little bit of discrepancy when we go into 2 Samuel. We get a different story, okay? We know, first off, that Saul was shot by the Philistines with an arrow. And so he's wounded to the point that he's convinced he can't survive. And so rather than for the Philistines to come on him and abuse him and torture him, do whatever, he asked his armor bearer to kill him. But his armor bearer would not do that, and I could understand why. That's not why you're the armor bearer. You're there to protect rather than to kill him. And so the account we have in 1 Samuel is that Saul fell on his sword. It's important to understand that it's sword that he fell on, okay? And that he died, and when his armor bearer, Saul, that Saul had died, then his armor bearer does the same thing and kills himself. And so just keep that in mind, because when we open up in 2 Samuel, we're going to see a little bit different story. And I personally think the guy's lying, okay? So we'll get into that later on. But this basically concludes the 1 Samuel teaching. It starts out with Samuel, mom giving him as a dedication to God. And then how Samuel becomes the great prophet. I mean, he was a renowned prophet. And he anoints Saul. And then he grieves over Saul's disobedience and God taking the kingdom from him. Samuel anoints David. And then Samuel actually dies before Saul. And if you remember, Saul tried to communicate through a familiar spirit with Samuel. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And so that's just the way this thing starts. That's the way it ends. And then in sandwiched in that, you see David anointed king, and you see Saul's jealousy and David running for his life. And in that period of time, David's being seasoned as a leader by leading renegades, you understand? And so he goes through a lot of experiences. He goes through a lot of testing here. David is actually proving himself as a worthy leader. And that's basically what we're seeing here in 1 Samuel. And so with that in mind, we'll conclude this teaching, and then we'll go into 2 Samuel.